Olson.
Here.
Jordan.
Here.
Lodge. Dominguez.
Here.
Murillo.
Here.
Campanella.
Here.
And Chair White.
Here. Are there any changes to the agenda? Okay. All right. So is there anybody in the public who wants to speak on something that is not on the agenda? Hi, Brian. Wait a minute. Hang on a sec, Brian. Do you have a slip? Slip. Okay. Might as well get the... Okay. And June is here. Okay. Public comment. Thank you. Okay. And then do we have any of these? The public comment. So, Mickey, your comments are not on things not on the agenda, or?
Well, they're not exactly on the agenda. In miscellaneous category at the end, we'll have to leave early. I just want to make a few comments.
Okay.
Public comment.
Great. Thank you. All right. So we will start with Brian Cornell.
Members of the task force, I will turn that on. I have mentioned many times here how important it is, I think, that the task force look at changes to the AUD ordinance and that we try to do that as it comes important. And I know we're talking about the mobile home parks today, but what I want to ask the task force to do is to get on the agenda the discussion of the donut hole as soon as possible. I will tell you, I think the timing is right to really be thinking about this. I don't know how it ultimately shakes out, but I absolutely believe in my heart that increased density in the State Street corridor is what's going to be a very vital, important component to keeping State Street a place, an active and vital place. And so I think the task force needs to certainly take the lead. I will tell you that the AIA architects are in communication with the downtown organization about trying to maybe arrange some kind of a charrette or something, which I think would be a really good thing to ideate on what is the right approach to this, because there's other issues besides just housing. But, you know, I think we left it out in a political moment, and I think now is the time for us to reconsider it, and this is a big part of the task force job. So I hope you can get that agendaized soon.
Great. Thank you, Brian. All right. Joanna Kaufman.
Hello. I'm here today on behalf of the Coalition for Sustainable Transportation, and I appreciate the task force looking at policies in the AUD specific to parking. And just want to reiterate to look, I know a lot of these policies are still in progress review, pending the outcome of the economic feasibility study, but just keeping in mind any of the policies that will provide a steady stream of finance for alternate or sustainable modes of transportation, or allowing people to lead a lifestyle that is not dependent on automobile use. Additionally, looking at policies that will continue to encourage development in more of the central downtown area. So I look forward to seeing the results of the economic feasibility study and to continue the conversation. Continue the conversation.
Great, thank you. Okay, next is Anna Marie Gott, to be followed by Mickey Flax.
It's green, so can you hear me?
It's a lit green. Just make sure it's really lit. Yeah.
Can you hear in the back?
Testing. Is it working now? Okay. I've submitted a letter to you, and I would like you to really consider bringing the ADU covenant to the Housing Task Force. The city is going to have to, based upon state law, allow ADUs. But there are things that we can do to ensure that the ADUs actually are going to go for our workforce and residents that live here and people that are not necessarily transient, meaning that they do not live here all year round. I would like you to take a look at ensuring that we have enforceable covenants, very similar to the old granny unit covenants that require an annual reporting, to not only to say what the rent is, but also that the individual is a resident here in Santa Barbara. I'd also like you to consider a 1-year lease rather than a month-to-month or shorter-term lease for individuals with the ADUs. Okay? Thank you.
Thank you. All right, Nikki Flax, to be followed by Lucas Zucker.
Thank you for giving me the opportunity. I'll have to leave early, and based on past experience, I'm not sure you're going to get to the last item on the agenda, so I just wanted to make a few comments about that. I have given you the...
Well, it needs to be public comment, not on things that are not on the agenda, Mickey. You know that.
But that's not going to talk about it today, or if you will, it will be after I leave.
You know, we can't, you know our situation here.
To me, it's not clear whether this is an agenda item. It's listed under additional topics. It's sort of, if we can talk about it, we will. If not, we won't. That's the way I read it.
Okay.
And I will stay within the limit. I just have a few comments to make on it. These tweaks are intended to deal with the objections that you have heard from the community about AUD. And I think some of the points that have been made are valid. So the tweaks address income distribution. Who are these units for? How can that be controlled? That is a key element in the whole program because the MARC has highlighted that situation. Who gets these units? Are they just on the open market? If you talk about market rate, that's kind of first come, first serve. But we want to limit it to employees on the South Coast. Can they be condoized or turned into B&Bs? That hasn't been addressed, and I think it has to be part of the ordinance eventually. And lastly, at this point, the renters' rights are something that are on the agenda. So this would be a good start to make sure that this massive, hopefully, rental program takes account of renters' rights, including at least the offering of a 1-year lease rather than month to month. So that's the point I wanted to make. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, Lucas Zucker, to be followed by Jose Arturo Gallegos.
Good afternoon. My name is Lucas Zucker. I'm the Policy Director for CAUSE. Among other things, we organize working-class immigrant families around renters' rights and housing affordability issues here in Santa Barbara and throughout the region. I want to thank this Housing Task Force for doing this really important work to address Santa Barbara's housing crisis. We believe AUD is a critical component of the solution to tackling the shortage of housing. Santa Barbara's nearly microscopic vacancy rate leads to rising rents, unfair evictions, ignored maintenance. Lack of housing is driving eye-popping rent increases throughout Santa Barbara and displacing too many of our working families to Lompoc, Ventura, and beyond. AUD is key to getting more housing built, but when the AUD mixes with the global market forces of real estate speculation and gentrification, it can produce too many luxury units that don't serve the existing communities. And when new developments aimed at upper-middle-class young professionals are built in our historically immigrant communities like the East Side, they can fuel the real estate speculation that pushes up land prices in the neighborhood. The AUD program needs to be adjusted to increase the production of affordable housing and prevent the gentrification of affordable neighborhoods. So, CAUSE, we strongly support the concept of a housing impact fee discussed in earlier Housing Task Force meetings, with state funding for affordable housing construction being cut by 70% since 2010, and federal funds on the chopping block by the Trump administration. We need a local revenue stream to create quality, permanent, affordable housing. And if there's going to be a flood of investment capital into Santa Barbara to develop new housing, we need to direct some of it towards what the community needs, truly affordable housing. We also encourage the task force to think about community planning and where this new housing should be built. Where should housing for upper middle class young professionals in Santa Barbara go? The Milpas Corridor, the heart of Santa Barbara's Latino community, already struggling against displacement from one of the last affordable neighborhoods in the city, or on the State Street Corridor, where we have many empty storefronts from the disappearing retail sector, where mixed-use developments could help create a more vibrant, walkable, livable downtown. We need to shift the priority housing overlay map to encourage AUD construction into the downtown core and away from the east side where new luxury developments can fuel the fires of gentrification.
Great. You need to wrap up.
Great. Well, we believe there's room in this city for all of us to belong, and right now, too many members of our community are being pushed out. So we really think through community-led solutions, we can build housing for all. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, Jose Arturo Gallegos, to be followed by Alex Pujol.
Okay. Many of you know Jose Arturo Gallegos, and some of you also know that I was homeless out in the streets for quite some time, and I know this is a problem, but when I was out there, what really, really disgusted me is senior citizens homeless out there. And I'm going, and those with disabilities. And senior citizens were not getting the help. Yeah, grant you, I've met a couple that didn't want nothing to do with housing. But I know one eventually wound up in PATH. I hope she's doing well. Very sweet gal. But we need to focus, homeless, yes, a problem. A big problem amongst that group are senior citizens. They need to get off the streets. And one of the reasons is because of disabilities, health issues, and maybe some mental issues. So we need to get our senior citizens off the streets and get them into good, proper housing. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Alex Pujol, and June has waived her time to Alex. So you have 4 minutes.
I'm Alex Pujol, and I have spoken to you before about how this task force could encourage actually housing construction. As everyone knows, or should know, there is a yearly shortage of 90,000 dwellings in California, year in and year out, with an estimated deficit approaching 4 million units. In 2016, Sacramento enacted over 100 pieces of housing legislation. Its message to local jurisdictions was blunt and clear. We do not trust your judgment on housing, and we're slowly taking away your ability to block construction. Can you blame them? We continue to play games with housing element and RHNA numbers, dwellings that exist only on paper. Senate Bill 35 by Scott Wiener from San Francisco will become law later this year, and the pressure will ratchet up another notch. When Dave Davis was Community Development Director, he used to say, everybody hates the process, but everybody loves the result. That, I don't think, is longer the case. There was always a dark underbelly to our beautiful town, but it has grown to the point that now it is considered normal. In the 1960s, our workforce lived in Goleta. In the 80s, it commuted from Ventura. In the millennium, from Oxnard. It is not normal for 17,000 people to drive 50 miles each way to man our hospitals, schools, hotels, government offices, and police departments. We grow used to that. We see our property values rise, and we watch Santa Barbara morph into a gated community, older and whiter, while a younger, darker, and less affluent generation doesn't make it to meetings like this one to plead its case. Please know that millennials care much less about parking standards than 1,250 square foot open yards, and more about connectivity and living downtown. We do not build for us, we build for our children. And if they have to leave town because there is no room for them, then the shame is on us. We need to try harder. Open space, views, landscaping, and historic preservation are obviously extremely critical, but when their purpose is abused, they become the argument for exclusion. Do not wait for Sacramento to drop the other shoe. AUDs are one venue, ADUs, and proposals for the Central Business District are another, and we still have 4,000 illegal rentals that could use your help too. Story polls, modifications, and one more study will not generate the housing that we need. Lots of smaller units closer to downtown, everything within walking distance, and a generous sprinkle of ADUs everywhere. That is my vision for housing in Santa Barbara. So what is yours? Thank you.
Thank you. Kathy McCammon, and I see Betsy Kramer here is giving her time. Where's Kathy? As well as Jean Holmes. I saw Jean.
I was really going to speak on the items on the agenda.
Okay.
Is that all right now?
No.
Okay.
It doesn't say that on your slip. All right. So, and then Cameron Gray is also doesn't. Oh, you have a topic as well. Okay. Yeah. Great.
Excuse me. When you're done with this, do you want to go back?
Okay. Thank you. Okay.
Mr. Chair, I had a response to
Ms. Maria?
Mr. Cornell. Thank you. The Living Wage Committee of the City of Santa Barbara is having a forum a week from today, and I have a flyer, and I have others that I'll put over here. It's on jobs and housing in Santa Barbara, and specifically we're looking at bringing housing to the State Street corridor. So you are invited. And for everyone else who wants to come, please come. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. All right. I missed item A on our general business, and that is the approval of the minutes. Do we have any comment, any corrections to the minutes that our board members want to make? Do we have a motion then to approve the minutes?
So moved.
There's a motion by Jordan, second by Dominguez. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. All right. Thank you. All right. So now there are announcements. Do you have any announcements?
Actually, the only thing that I would like to share with everyone is that there's the National Housing Week of Action is having a group meeting July 24th. That's Monday from 4 to 6 at 721 Laguna Street, Presidio Springs. There are flyers on the shelf over there if you're interested. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, then that moves us to item 1, introduction of studies consultant. So, staff, you want to introduce the item and then go from there. Mr. Rao?
Hi, I'd like to introduce Reed Kawahara. He's from Kaiser Marston Associates, and we're kicking off, effective yesterday, the economic feasibility study and the Nexus study. I'd also like to point out in your packet there's a scope of services provided regarding the studies. And finally, Reed and I have a meeting scheduled at 2 o'clock, so once he's done with his presentation, we have about 40 minutes total. So thank you very much.
Okay. So welcome, Mr. Kawahara.
Thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Reed Kawahara. I'm principal with Kaiser Marston Associates. We have Kaiser Marston is a real estate consulting firm founded in 1973. We have offices in San Francisco, San Diego, and Los Angeles. And one of the areas of expertise for our firm is doing economic feasibility studies of real estate development and residential nexus studies. So we are quite experienced in doing the exact type of work we'll be doing for this assignment. So I put together a brief presentation, which I will go through talking about the various aspects of our scope. I know that the Housing Task Force has gone over the scope of our work before, so I won't go into that in great detail, but of course be available to answer any questions you might have. So with that being said, our work scope can be broken into basically 3 essential tasks. The first task is the economic feasibility study, which I'll describe in more detail next, the residential nexus study, and then we'll round that out by determining from the analysis and work with staff a set of recommendations tailored for addressing the specific policy goals that are being sought by the city of Santa Barbara. So first, to go through the economic feasibility study. So first of all, what it is and what its purpose is. Fundamentally, the purpose of the feasibility study is to understand the economics of building AUD projects here in Santa Barbara. There are essentially the understanding of the economics is intended to inform the following goals: to achieve broader affordable housing opportunities in Santa Barbara, but at the same time also minimizing affordable housing impacts on project feasibility. So I think it's probably clear that these two goals can, at some point, run at cross purposes, but the balance, the goal here, as it is in all communities where we do these studies, is to achieve a balance where we're achieving both goals to the maximum feasibility. In terms of the approach for doing the feasibility study, the first step is to understand the characteristics of AUD projects that are being proposed and being built on the ground. So that entails understanding the sizes of units. It requires understanding of densities, of parking solutions, types of project amenities, and so on and so forth. So we're going to be spending a lot of time here in the next couple of weeks just going through all the various projects that are proposed here in town and understanding all the details of that. The second element of the feasibility study is what we call a pro forma. We're doing a pro forma analysis to estimate the economics of these projects. So when we talk about economics, we're talking about things like land costs, what it costs to acquire properties, construction costs, of course. Indirect costs of construction includes design costs, engineering, fees and permits, insurance, all the kind of soft costs that you are required as part of a development project. It also involves estimating operating income in the way of rents or sale prices for condo projects, and also what the development return thresholds are for those projects. And all of those elements go into determination of financial feasibility. So from that analysis, and the pro forma is essentially going to be testing different, what we call prototypes, AUD prototypes. And the prototypes will vary depending on where they're proposed to be located, their densities, because the economic profile of the different prototypes differ. So it's important to understand to what extent new affordable housing fees or obligations will impact the range of different AUD projects that are being proposed. So in addition to the testing of affordable housing obligations, we're also going to be testing for variations on things like parking solutions, because we know that parking is one of the issues that we're going to be looking toward helping to address as part of this study. So then moving on to task number 2, the Nexus study. So first of all, what is the Nexus study? The Nexus study quantifies the need for affordable housing, or the impacts that are created by new market rate unit construction. So what we're doing is we are estimating the need for affordable housing that's created by new market rate units. And then the second question is, how could the city then mitigate those costs, or what are the city's costs to provide affordable housing for those new worker households? And so that's kind of how you create the connection or the nexus between new market rate unit construction and the support you need for adopting a fee.
Mr. Conrad, we have a question from the board here.
Yes.
Regarding the first bullet point, quantifies need for affordable housing created by new market rate units. Would you mind taking a minute explaining that in a little more detail? Because I think there's been a little misunderstanding about what that means, and it hasn't played enough role in the conversation. So if you could add a little light to that, that would be great.
You know, I think actually my next slide will get into that, so let me see if it does, and if it doesn't, we'll come back. So this next slide was intended to, I think, address that question, which is kind of to elaborate a little bit more on that nexus or the connection between the construction of new market rate units and the need for affordable housing. So we've put this chart together to sort of show that nexus, show the flow and how you connect one to the other. So starting from left going to the right with the red box. So you start out with new market rate unit construction. Of course, this study is focused on new AUD projects, not projects throughout the city of Santa Barbara. So our analysis will be focused very specifically on the AUD projects and the type of households that are occupying those units and how we create the nexus from there. The next sort of flow here in the chart is that once you have those new market rate units, of course you have new households that are occupying those units. Those households will spend money throughout the local economy. They'll be shopping at the grocery stores. They'll be going to restaurants. They will be have medical appointments and dental appointments. And as you can imagine, every way that you spend money here locally creates the need for services and goods, and in fact, quite a range of new jobs. And those jobs need to be filled by a variety of different workers, and those workers get paid a wide range of incomes and salaries, as you can imagine. So some are going to be quite highly compensated workers, like doctors, for example, but others will be lower paying. So you think about restaurant workers or people who are bagging of groceries, or so those are the types of workers, the lower income workers that we'll need to help to provide housing for. And again, that's where the connection is between the new market rate units and the new lower income households.
Question, Mr. Chair, while we're on this subject. Thank you. Mr. Kawahara, will you take into account that in Santa Barbara we have overcrowding? So I know the people next door to me, there's the grandparents, their children, and then their children, and they all live in the same home. Mm-hmm. And also there's overcrowding of some of our undocumented labor force, and they're definitely living crowded in a house, in the garage, et cetera. So I would assume that some of the new units would just empty out an overcrowded situation, and I just think not everyone's going to come from outside. And if you don't know that about Santa Barbara, you should know that. People live in crowded situations. We're all doubled up. Every bedroom is rented to someone else, unless it's a vacation rental. But yeah, so thank you. I just wanted to add that to your knowledge. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, I mean, typically what we do in this analysis, well, what we always do in these types of analyses is tailor the analysis for the specific characteristics of the community. So just to give you an example, we use a industry standard model called IMPLAN. What the IMPLAN model does is it's a model that's used throughout the country, and it's been used for over 30 years. What it does is it estimates how household income expenditures translates into jobs, which again goes to the nexus concept that I was just describing. And those models are specific to each community. So, for example, we will purchase a IMPLAN model specifically for Santa Barbara. And so in that respect, it is tailored. All of the aspects of our work is intended to be tailored for the local community. As to the specific question or issue that you're raising about overcrowding, I think what we'll be doing is we'll be working closely with staff to make sure that all of the local conditions are properly accounted for in our analysis.
Thank you.
So yes, that would be the intent.
Question. Mr. Campbell.
Thank you. In that regard, as far as the city of Santa Barbara, probably not uniquely to a lot of the communities that you've looked at, but just looking at our particular case, we have a very large visitor serving economy, and that visitor serving economy is not consistent all year round. So jobs, positions, demand would be seasonal. So I don't know how that affects your consistent demand for jobs, number one. Mm-hmm. And then number two is I don't know if this is occurring in other communities that you're looking at, but a lot of our AUD components are being developed on commercial properties, which still may have some mixed use, but let's say a reduction, we have a pretty good reduction in commercial uses currently and potential. So I don't know how that affects a net job increase or decrease. Or do you consider how the loss of commercial property might affect the net amount of jobs that are needed to service the new units?
Well, let me address the first point you made. I think in terms of visitor-serving community, we've done some recent work in some areas that have some of the similar characteristics in that regard. So, for example, we've done a Nexus study in Honolulu. We recently did a Nexus study in Boulder. We're actually doing a Nexus study right now in San Luis Obispo. So. I think my colleague David Dozma, who is sort of taking the lead on the Nexus study, has a lot of experience tailoring our analyses for the individual types of communities, and so again, that's an issue that we'll probably dialogue with staff more about, making sure that we're capturing all those factors.
And then the commercial.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of commercial, maybe it's important just to say from the outset that what our study does not do is our study is not doing a commercial linkage study. And what a commercial linkage study is doing, it's modeling the affordable housing impacts that are created by new commercial development, because this program, what we're discussing now, is intended for an affordable housing fee on new residential projects. So just to clarify that from the outset. But in terms of the fact that new AUD projects are being developed on properties that are improved with commercial uses, that certainly comes into play with respect to the financial fees, the economic feasibility study and land values and those kind of issues. So we will definitely be modeling those characteristics as part of the feasibility study. Yeah. Okay. Okay, so I think I got through this slide that kind of covered the concept of the nexus and kind of how you make that connection between a new market rate unit construction and the need for affordable housing. And I guess my next slide really kind of says in words what I just described, so I don't know that I need to go through this much more. I guess the only other thing I'd say that I didn't speak to very specifically in the last slide had to do with item number 5, where once you have the need for affordable housing that you've estimated, how do you then translate that into a fee? And so first of all, if the city were to collect a fee from new market rate housing developers, the city would then, of course, need to take those fee revenues to help mitigate the cost or the impacts that are created by the new market rate units. And so the question is, how much of a fee to collect, and then how will the city then use those fees? And so the city, this is something that, since we just started this work, we haven't dialogued a lot with the city about, but the city has subsidized a lot of affordable housing projects in the past. A lot of them, I'm sure, are multifamily tax credit projects that are subsidized by a variety of different funding sources. But essentially what needs to happen is the city needs to provide a subsidy to make those projects financially feasible. So you take the cost to the city of subsidizing those projects, and then you translate that cost into a fee for all the market rate units that are coming down the road. So that's how you then go from the new housing demand, affordable housing demand, to an actual fee that you might collect. Okay, so that kind of takes us to some of the policy considerations, implementation considerations, and the Nexus study itself it's actually a legal requirement. You have to have a Nexus study in order to adopt an impact fee, and what the Nexus study is doing is setting a maximum level, a maximum fee that can be charged to mitigate those impacts that I was describing. Now, quite often it's the case that a local jurisdiction will not actually adopt a fee that's at the maximum legal level. And there are a variety of considerations that come into play when cities are considering at what level below the maximum to adopt a fee. So one of them, of course, is what we talked about before, is economic feasibility. And so I think the idea there is that while we all understand that affordable housing is really important, there is some point, some level of a fee which will make it very difficult for market rate developers to build housing because you're adding more cost to a project. It makes it more difficult to build. So there's always that little bit of tension to know what is the right rate at which to charge projects before you kind of hit that threshold where the projects aren't feasible anymore. And so that's really the fundamental purpose of the feasibility study, is to kind of understand where is that level. So that's certainly one of the important considerations in the fee, the amount of the fee to adopt. Another consideration that a lot of cities and probably jurisdictions want to know is, what are my neighbors doing as far as requirements, or what are kind of competing areas doing as far as affordable housing requirements. That's often a consideration, not always, but it is something that we could consider as part of our recommendations for Santa Barbara. And then finally, there can be a variety of other local policy objectives that might come into play as to the amount of fee that you might charge. And just to give you an example, if at a policy level, if you wanted to encourage more housing in certain areas, or if you wanted to encourage smaller units, as we know we are trying to do here as part of the program, you might adjust your fees to incentivize developers to do more development of certain types, or more development in certain areas. So there are different ways that you can structure a fee program to try to encourage achieving of certain policy goals. And those are all things that we're going to be going through as part of this overall process. So my last slide here is to just talk a little bit about the timeline, how we're going to be going through the analysis, and how we're expecting all that to go. So here we are in July. We're kind of just kicking this off, initiating work, getting accustomed to all of the AUD projects that are being proposed, and what those characteristics are, as I was describing before. Over the next roughly month or so, we will be engaging in stakeholder outreach, and we know that there's quite a long list of stakeholders to reach out to, and we will be contacting folks to get input. I'm sure there are developers and market participants and affordable housing advocates, and we really want to hear everybody's input and make sure that we are developing a set of recommendations that is well informed.
Could I ask a question at this point?
Sure.
Is that the same as the expert contact list, your stakeholders?
It is. Yeah.
So my concern is you're pretty heavily weighted towards developers who are taking advantage of the AED program. There's only one nonprofit. Cause or other advocacy groups are left off the list.
That list is not complete yet. We're in the process of adding more advocacy groups and housing groups. So there is kind of a little difference between an expert list and a stakeholders list. Everyone in this room is a stakeholder. In fact, everyone in the city of Santa Barbara is a stakeholder. So there will be points where, for example, the draft is shown to this group in this meeting with the opportunity for comment with an entire month to make adjustments. So there is a little bit of a difference, but we will definitely look to add more to the side of housing advocacy groups on the list. And if, in fact, you have suggested names, I already have 4 or 5 to add to the list. Please let me know.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, and then the actual kind of meat and potatoes of the analyses themselves, the economic feasibility study and the nexus study, will be done in parallel over a roughly 3-month period between August and October. We will be conducting progress meetings throughout with staff, again, kind of addressing a lot of the kind of Santa Barbara specific issues, making sure that those are properly addressed. We are targeting to have an administrative draft of both reports at least by the end of October, soliciting input, and making adjustments as necessary, with the goal of reaching final reports by the end of November. So with that, I guess I can open it up to any questions. Any other questions? Or
Great. Thank you. Commissioner Dominguez?
In the document you presented, I noticed the word rental, but I didn't see for sale or condos. Did I just miss that, or are you not touching that aspect of the housing market?
We are. We are analyzing both rental projects and ownership condo projects. So yes, we will be analyzing both.
Thank you.
Okay. Other questions? Mr. Campanella?
Yeah.
Ms. Lodge?
Let's see, I guess a question for David, too, is I don't think I saw anyone from the design review boards as far as reach out, and that's an integral part of what's produced in the city. Will he be speaking with them as well relative to design guidelines, compatibility, et cetera, that go into significantly into product development?
It would be great if you would volunteer a name or two, and we could add them to the list.
Sure.
That would be great. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Lodge?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Could you expand on the minimize affordable housing impacts? I didn't quite understand what you meant by that. It was the second slide you had where you discussed.
Oh, yes. Okay. Yeah. Here, let me go back to that. Okay. I think you're referring to the second blue arrow there, right? One of the goals or purposes of the feasibility study is to minimize affordable housing impacts on project feasibility. That's your question? Yeah. Yeah, so this kind of goes back to the comments I was making about this sort of tension between one goal being that you want to generate revenue to help subsidize affordable housing projects and or include affordable units within the project itself. I mean, those are both ways that you could achieve affordable housing, both of which come at a cost to the project and can challenge financial feasibility of projects. So I think that one of the purposes of the study is to kind of understand at what point you are charging too much of a fee or you are requiring too much of an on-site affordable housing obligation that will flip a project that would have been financially feasible to a project that is no longer feasible. So that's kind of what this is trying to say, is we're sort of trying to test that threshold. And we don't want to cross that threshold, because if you cross that threshold, you won't have a project that's built. And if you don't have a project that's built, not only will you not generate fee revenue, and you won't get any on-site affordability either. So it's sort of like you won't get anything that you might want. But maybe it's worth saying a little bit more about how we determine financial feasibility. I know I spoke to a little bit before about estimating construction costs and estimating condo prices and rents and so forth. Those are all elements, of course, that go into the feasibility study. Now, there could be, we do know that there is some flexibility in those numbers, and there's elasticity in some of those numbers. So, for example, if you were to impose a fee, would a developer be willing to take less of a return, for example, less profit? Or another way to look at it is, if you imposed a fee, would a property owner be willing to sell their land for less than they would ordinarily be able to? That kind of goes into the question of elasticity. So it's not necessarily kind of cut and dry equation where you add a cost and that translates necessarily into the ability to charge a fee. So we take all those kind of considerations into as part of our calculation of what is that right balance. And, it's a function of, doing these projects all over the state, knowing how developers look at these projects, and kind of making a determination based on our experience about where that threshold is.
Okay, well then another question is, will you be looking at projects that are not mixed use? Most of the projects coming through have been mixed use, but there is one that where a commercial use is going away, and instead the project is going to be entirely residential. That to me is preferable because you're not creating new jobs that, with the business, with the other impact or with market rate, where you create more jobs simply by the presence of the new unit. Will you be analyzing those as well as possibilities?
I'm not sure I totally understand the question. I mean, the fact that you are replacing what might be a commercial use with a residential use, it certainly impacts on what it would cost to acquire the property, and we certainly take those costs into consideration. But as to replacing a commercial use with a residential use, in and of itself doesn't come into play in the analysis. I'm not sure I'm totally understanding the question.
Well, just, seeing all the costs, whatever they are, I'll back up a little bit. To me, it seems to be preferable to have projects that are all residential, since they are they are not going to be creating, the project will not be creating new jobs that are generally low paid, which would be generating additional demand for affordable housing. And so at least one developer has found it financially feasible to propose such a project, and I would like to see more, and I would hope that you could somehow include this in what.
Yeah, well, we are certainly aware, based on our initial review of projects, that there are certainly a lot of mixed-use projects that are being built or proposed as part of the AUD program. And as you say, there are some that are all residential. And we have not yet dialed down specifically yet what our prototypes we will analyze, but it seems to me that having a mixed-use prototype and separately a residential prototype might be appropriate given the circumstances you have here already. And so I think that would lend itself to kind of comparing the two and understanding how the economics of one might compare to the other. And I think with the results of that analysis, it could be then used to inform policy decisions going forward.
And taking into consideration, like the extra demand for parking space.
Yes, absolutely.
Have commercial as against if it's all residential.
Absolutely. You're right, because a lot of commercial uses are parking intensive, and parking is very expensive to build, especially in higher densities, which these projects are. So yes, it very much comes into play with respect to parking.
Okay, thank you.
So, Ms. Murillo?
Thank you. I'd like these slides emailed to me, and I think, Mr. Buell, we should post them to the AUD website. Thank you. And then the Allied Neighborhoods Association gave us a nice list of suggested stakeholders of groups to be. Yeah, thanks. And then finally, if you're looking at other jurisdictions, Mr. Kawahara, you know, the city's built out, obviously, and so, you know, Goleta can ask for impact fees because they're building roads there. That's not the case for a lot of our properties here, but you'll find out our particulars here, I'm sure. Thank you.
Mr. Campanella?
Just picking up on Commissioner Lodge's comment, I think I saw in one of your studies in looking at the impact fees that in some cases commercial property in a mixed-use development might be considered a negative on the development, on the overall pro forma relative to having the burden of carrying that by the residential. And some consideration was given in the fee structure to account for those that might have more commercial versus less. Did I read that correctly?
You probably did. I don't know what study you were reading, but it's certainly true that in a lot of communities that we work, they really encourage mixed-use development, actually, because for housing projects, for example, that are in downtown settings, much like here, they want to encourage active ground floor uses. So they want to have retail, or they want to have restaurants or other commercial services. And so, however, with that as a policy goal, it's often economically challenging for developers to do that, actually, because the layouts of those spaces don't always lend themselves well for retail tenants, and the rents that they can achieve often aren't as much as you could if they were all residential. And so the conclusion that we come to, actually, in a lot of communities is that, in fact, it's the residential component of the project that's subsidizing the non-residential components of the project. So I don't want to get ahead of our analysis here because we haven't done it yet, but you certainly might be right that that was something that we concluded in another city. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Mr. Jordan?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just several questions. One is that several times in your scope and deliverables you use the phrase low and moderate income, and in one particular place you actually spell out those percentages, and in particular like moderate, the 80 to 120%.
Yes.
It's pretty I'm just curious if that limits what you're looking at, because I think it's pretty common for somebody to make more than 120% of that moderate level income, but be paying too much of their percentage of what they get in rent.
Mm-hmm.
So when you're looking at that math, are you still able to, are you limiting yourself by those government numbers of 80% and below and 80% to 120, or do you just continue to look at data that will just help anybody that's paying more than the federal or state percentage of their income as rent?
Yeah, well, you're right that most of the studies that we do quantify the impact at certain affordability levels. So, for example, at the moderate income level, the 80 to 120% of AMI is typically the highest level of affordability that we will analyze. And, of course, we will analyze everything below that, from very low income to extremely low income. But that's not to say we couldn't analyze impacts at affordability levels higher than 120%, because you're certainly right that a lot of communities in California are confronting this issue of those middle-income households not being able to afford housing. So we could tailor the program to analyze an additional level of affordability if we so desire.
I'm the wrong guy to take that conversation farther, but John Campanella could probably help you with that, what that really looks like, that I'm just kind of saying. Then my other question was, I had the same comment Jason made on for sale units, and in particular on that bullet on the bottom, all you do is mention ROIs on rentals and not for sales. And so I think that should change. And in particular, I'd also like to see for sale included in the priority housing overlay, which right now I think is just rental availability. You couldn't do a for sale unit in there. Mm-hmm. So, and then I'm going to get lost in this question really quick, but so this process, I get it, is kind of like a statistical reference related thing that kind of chases itself. Is there nothing in this process that starts to ascertain also what some would call the negative impacts of the pursuit? So the loss, the dollar loss, the dollar impact as a result of a loss of parking, as a result of higher density and smaller open space, as a result of even loss of views is on my mind right now. But this chases itself kind of to pursue this goal, but it doesn't talk about, you put 40 units in, but you displace 8 units that were already there. You put 40 units in and you displace 8 small businesses. Does it not address that at all as part of the economic kind of survey and nexus? On that one slide that you kind of started to talk about it, if you just did this, if you just encouraged this, you'd still screw yourself in the end because you'd end up creating more jobs to serve those additional housing units. But what about the loss of those other kind of gray area social things that aren't reflected. Is that just not included?
Well, let me see if I understand your question. Is your question whether we are going to quantify the loss of jobs that are being displaced?
Could be jobs, could be housing units, could be less definable stuff like higher impacts on commercial parking on the street from the increased density of residential units in a mixed-use zone.
Mm-hmm.
At its worst, undefinable, it could be views. I don't think this is what we're talking about, but I'm just wondering, have people brought this up before, and is there a method to take a stab at that, or is that just so gray that you can't?
Yeah. I'm trying to think. I mean, we have had to address a lot of different issues that sort of indirectly are related to what we're doing. I'll
give you an example.
Yeah.
That's pretty tangible, because I've been on a rant lately the last 2 months at Planning Commission. So 3 projects. One was not an AUD project. One was a hotel. 2 more projects last week or 2 weeks ago. And between those 3 projects, they when they're eventually built, they will displace at least a dozen small businesses. Okay, so there is a cost to that. There is both a community cost and a tangible cost to those people having to look for replacement space that doesn't exist in the city. To those people having to take their business to Ventura, to those people just not having a business anymore. And I'm just wondering, as an example, is that a type of process you look at, or part of what you build into this end result?
That's a good question. I have to think we have addressed that somewhere before. I can't think of right now where that's been or how we've done it. I mean, obviously, I think as you're indicating, the assumption here is that if you're displacing a business, that business is not relocating to another part of the city. So, in other words, possibly, right. So there would, in fact, be a net impact on the city if that business simply went away and didn't stay in the city. That's a good question. I'd have to dialogue with my colleagues about what is the ways that we have approached that question before. Yeah, okay. Okay. I'm not thinking of it right now, but I think.
Yeah, thank you. It was an interesting question.
Yeah.
Dominguez, you have something else?
The way impact fees are referred to pretty generically, and I saw a great presentation on traffic impact fees in particular.
Mm-hmm.
So does this leave us open to call them traffic impact fees, affordable housing impact fees?
Mm-hmm. Well, the impact fee that we would be adopting as part of this would be specifically an affordable housing fee. Not at all related to, I mean, you could adopt a traffic impact fee as well, but you would need a separate nexus study for that legally. So you would have a traffic consultant that would come in and quantify the, traffic impacts that are created by new market rate units, and that would be the nexus for a traffic fee. That's not what we're doing. We're doing very specifically an affordable housing impact fee.
Okay, so it is an affordable housing impact fee.
It is.
I wanted to make sure there was a modifier in front of impact fee, or at least know the menu of options. So in this case, if it after the study, we'd only be able to pass something that would then go into affordable housing.
Correct.
Okay.
All the fees that you generate as part of this would need to be dedicated specifically for affordable housing.
Okay. And the question Mr. Jordan had about the 80 to 120%. Now, that's kind of the workforce housing, right? That's what the Housing Urban Institute calls workforce housing. Is that correct?
State of California Health and Safety Code definition is for 80 to 120% of AMI is technically moderate income. The use of the term workforce housing is a little bit loose. I don't think it's not a legal state definition, but a lot of communities do use the workforce level income, which in the communities that I've worked with tend to be in the range of 120 to 150% of AMI.
And you're right, it's not in the state code, but when the state gives out grants for workforce housing, specifically, quote, workforce, they require it to be in the 80 to 120.
Okay, I'm not sure which programs those are, but okay.
HCDs in general.
Yeah, okay.
And we've applied and gotten those grants before, so that's part of the reason I'm aware of it.
I see.
Because over 120, those residents also are capable of looking at the non-rental housing market. So that's one of the things that I would prefer that the focus be on, that workforce housing, the 80 to 120. If we can help people above that, great. But I think, and in line with a lot of the comments we heard today, is we're worried about it. And I think that's the whole point of this study, is to make sure we're not building only market rate units and we're losing units literally because there are units being demolished that are workforce units to be replaced with higher end units. And I guess I'll add that variant into the mix people are adding in if we take out commercial, but we're actually taking out some of our older housing stock, and the real estate economics term, filtering, so we're losing some of that filtering housing.
Yeah.
So I'm assuming that your model takes into account some of that when you're looking at particular communities.
Yeah.
And I'm glad you made the comment or raised the question of, if you impose a fee, would it go to the property owner or the developer? I think there's a common perception, or people throughout this cliche, it's going to be passed on to the renter. And I don't think they understand how there's a market which kind of controls the prices. And in our situation, when we passed AUD, and I'm not saying that's the sole cause, but property prices in Santa Barbara went way up. And so it would be useful to know, is that because property owners realize that developers would pay more because, like you were talking about, there's higher density, we're taking away parking requirements, open space requirement. So we gave all of these things away to developers. But I'm not sure if the developers even benefit. It's the property owner, because then they can raise the price because they know when the developer goes to the bank and needs to get their financing and there's a pro forma, there's a certain percentage of profit that's going to rise and drop based on the costs. So I'm glad you mentioned that too. Yeah. And overall, my just general comment, I guess I'll throw in comments if I'm done with questions. I'm really glad that you guys are taking on this study. I think it's going to be really helpful to our community. It'll bring in a lot of facts and evidence that people can look at. The council had put this on the agenda about a year ago, and it got pushed back to this time, so I'm glad we're taking action now. It's late, but it's not too late.
Thank you, Mr. Dominguez. Okay, we have a couple of public comment slips here. We have Greg Reitz and Anna Marie Gott. Is Greg still here? Okay, then Anna Marie Gott.
Hi, I gave you guys a letter, and hopefully you will also get testing. Hi, I gave you a letter, and hopefully you will also get a copy of it. Yesterday we had a really important meeting at City Council, and I want you to be aware of the condominium hotel conversion ordinance, which I don't know if you are actually going to be looking at that with the study. I would like you to actually look at this for item 1, because this particular ordinance allows for an unlimited number of residential units to be converted to permanent use as hotels/vacation rentals in the city of Santa Barbara when a single unit is converted. We've already seen abuses of the people that have already gotten these hotel conversion permits or change of use, whatever you want to call it. But more importantly, we have 8,900 units of housing that sit in the R4 in the commercial zone. That's about 25% of our housing. The next thing I wanted to mention was that we have about 800 units that have been permanently removed from the market for short-term vacation rentals. You can find that number on like a monthly basis. Those are entire units that have been removed. And these policies, meaning the policy of having the ordinance and the enforcement policies, procedures, and the fine structure for enforcement of short-term vacation rentals, I think should be looked at in this study, because they are very much related to what is happening with housing in Santa Barbara. we had 3 denials of hotel conversions that I participated in. And last night, the city council upheld that denial. And the individual had solely purchased the home for use only as a vacation rental. And we have many, many, many other homes here in Santa Barbara where that's what people are doing.
Wrap up.
Purchasing a home, removing it from the residential market, and only for use as short-term vacation rental. I have other comments, and I guess I'll send them to someone. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Okay.
Questions of the consultant.
Okay, go ahead.
The part of that's been gnawing at me is this whole question of who is the new unit and the impact of the new unit, and I don't know how you get to understanding, since most of these units have not been built. We only have one project that's actually occupied. How do we know if the people who are moving in are already living in Santa Barbara with a job in Santa Barbara, as opposed to coming from the outside? It's just critical. That's a critical piece to understand thoroughly.
Thank you. All right, and then Eve Sanford, who now wants to speak on item 1.
Hi, Eve Sanford from the Santa Barbara Bicycle Coalition. This kind of relates to to item 3, but I thought I would talk about it now. So I think that this is an important juncture to consider how we can structure the AUD program to better fund a more multimodal transportation system. And so 2 ways of doing that.
We're trying to do we're doing the nexus issue here, right?
Yes, but in order to consider both parking and lieu fees and transportation impact fees, you'll have to at some point either do a nexus study separately or perhaps in tandem with this current nexus study.
So for public transportation?
Not necessarily public transportation like mass transportation, but just, I guess this study is looking at specifically impact fees that would fund affordable housing. But I think in tandem, there'd be great synchronicity if this task force were to consider a nexus study for transportation
connectivity
purposes. Yeah, for connectivity.
Okay, great.
Okay.
Thank you.
Could I proceed with my comment?
On item 1 only, right?
Yes. Well.
Yeah. See, we've got 3 items. We need to get to them. That's your nexus issue. If you want to hang around and to participate in the 3rd item, please do.
Okay, I'll do that.
Okay, thank you. All right. So, Kathy, you are on item 2. That's what you're.
I have items on all the things on the agenda.
Okay.
And
all
I
right,
just
go
wanted
ahead.
to do the
Go
2
ahead.
quick ones relating to this.
Okay.
Thank you, Kathy.
Item 1.
Item
Nexus study, right?
For bringing up the increase in the number of the stakeholders and referencing our list. Then the other thing we have is that we think that the consultant's report is so important that it should be televised.
Okay.
We don't care if it's from here or from the city council chambers, but we think it's important to all the people in Santa Barbara.
Good idea.
It's involved a lot of resources and all your time.
Right.
So I think it's really important to get it out there.
Okay.
Thank you.
Good idea. Thank you. Okay. Then thank you for your presentation, and we look forward to seeing the results of your work.
And Mr. Chair, we will answer the question about short-term rentals. Mr. Kawahara was taking notes when Ms. Gott was talking, and as much as I'm concerned about short-term rentals, I don't think that should be part of the Nexus study. He's so busy already, Ms. Gott, and looking at some other things. You raise a great point. We're looking at that. Can we make that clear that this body has not said short-term rental should be part of the Nexus study, Mr. Buell? Can we make that clear?
Yes, we can.
Thank you.
Wait. I think this is a democracy here. Let me just be clear in terms of the scope of work that is before Kaiser Marston. That scope of work has been solidified with the council's approval of the item last night, and so to expand that scope to include vacation rentals could result in additional cost and definitely in additional conversation with the consultant. You can't do a proper study without looking at all the factors playing into the Santa Barbara housing situation. You can't ignore the 8,900 units that could be converted to vacation rentals. It has an impact on supply. It has an impact on demand. To ask a consultant to not look at the laws on the books is just crazy.
Just as a point of clarification, Councilmember Dominguez, help me understand what you're referring to in state law so I can understand and communicate that back to the consultant.
Which state law are you talking about?
I thought you referred to a state law.
Santa Barbara city law.
Okay.
Did I say state? I'm sorry, I meant city.
I thought you did. Yeah, so it was unclear.
Well, they should look at state law, too.
Okay.
Well, I think we need to talk about AUD and vacation rentals. That's on our list, right?
That's coming up later in the meeting.
Right. Okay.
Sure. If I can, I think one thing to remember when you're dealing with impact fees, there are standards and procedures that you have to follow in order to qualify with the impact fee, SB 800 or whatever it's called at the state level. So if we're starting to branch out into some other study and not sticking with the particular program that we're talking about, we have a danger, I think, of not really coming up with a defensible study on the impact fee, and you might want to check with our attorneys on that before we branch out into other considerations. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, I'd like to wrap this one up so we can move on to the next item. I know even though Ms. Murillo has suggested we skip over the mobile home one, I'd like to see if I can expedite this so that we can have all the rest of our time for freewheeling conversation. So perhaps what I'd like to do is have staff introduce the topic and give your staff report. Then I'm going to ask about anybody who's objects to changing the designation on mobile home parks to get rid of AUD, and then we'll take the conversation from there. But let's start with the staff report, and then hopefully we can find a way to expedite this so we can get the mobile home people so you can leave if you want to leave, or love to have you stay, but at least you're free to make your choice. And then we'll be able to get into our more freewheeling conversation. So start with the staff report.
Thank you, Chair White.
Okay, then we won't have time.
I'm George Buell, Community Development Director, and at the direction of the City Council, the item before you at this time, looking at the AUD overlay as it relates to mobile home parks, the question is whether or not the AUD overlay should be removed so that the AUD rules in essence don't apply to mobile home parks. The Council heard, as well as your board has heard, concerns from mobile home park residents. They're concerned, as you know, there was one park that was up for sale. It was very concerning to members of the council, obviously as residents of the park. And so the question is it appropriate to have the overlay placed on the mobile home parks? Shown on the screen, you can see that there are a number of mobile home parks, and I'll focus in on the 6 mobile home parks that do have the AUD overlay on them. And even though the font is very small on the screen, I'm going to essentially walk through. So you see the mobile home parks, and for the purposes of the people in the audience, the parks are identified here in these little white boxes. And so you see them mostly on the southeast part of town, but with these other parks that are in other parts of the city. And looking at the parcel size, we see that, well, the parcel size is indicated in this column right here. And if you can see that, the number of existing units are in this column. And then potential AUD units at market rate, and then potential base density units. And so this map is in your agenda packet, and I'll assume that you can read that font, and I recognize that it is very small. Nonetheless, what in general is shown here is that with the application of the AUD overlay, there very well is economic incentive to convert the mobile home parks from mobile home use to an AUD project. And with that, very generally, I would hand it over to you, Chair White, for input. And if you have questions related to zoning regulations, we have City Planner Renee Brook here with us. I would also want to make very clear that this is a very rough estimate with regards to the potential unit yield on each of the projects. It does not take into consideration the potential presence of environmental concerns such as a creek or a wetland or anything like that. We know that there are creeks that run through some of these, and so looking just in very broad terms, could there be economic impact or incentive rather to convert the parks? Yes, generally speaking.
Great. Well, thank you, Mr. Buell. So, in summary term, there's been this. We've learned that the AUD zoning, if kept on the mobile home parks, would retain or retain an incentive for those mobile home parks to be changed out to another use. And so today, on our agenda today, is the request or recommendation that we change the zone, the land use designation on those 8 mobile home parks to eliminate the AUD potential in order to obviously to protect more strongly the mobile home use there. So what I want to do first, just as a way to try and cut to the chase, because I expect where this is going, are there people here who object to changing that zoning? If you could raise your hand, I'd appreciate it. Okay. Seeing that we have no sort of blanket objection to changing the zoning, please understand we're trying to move through this quickly, and that's why I'm thinking we have a recommendation for a zoning change to occur here. So help us do this in an expeditious fashion. I'm going to ask each of you to come and speak. If you can either waive your time or come up and just say, I support the zoning change, something like that, I'd appreciate it. So I'll start with Crystal Barros. Is that a right pronunciation? Better than yours. Followed by Sarah Patchen.
Running out the doors. Okay.
Thank you. I support the change. Thank you. But additionally, we would like to ask that, and I'm not sure this is the right forum, that if it's possible to open up the general plan to allow us to be zoned as a mobile home park.
Great.
That's all.
Thank you. Okay, Sarah Patchen, to be followed by Jim Farned.
I support the change, and I'll forego reading the thoughts I was going to have, but just to let you know that many of the residents, I'm a resident of Flamingo Mobile Home Park, many of the residents are very low income and also suffer from disabilities and illnesses, myself included. So just to let you know that this is the change of this would be very impactful for us. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for coming out today. Jim Farned.
I was given Pam Emerson's time as well.
Okay. I see Pam Emerson. Are you here?
Yes.
Okay. All right, great. I see your slip here. Great. Thank you. You have 4 minutes then.
Mr. Chairman and members of the task force, the dire social consequences of park closure are currently being addressed in ongoing revisions to city code. These revisions were outlined in a report by the city attorney to council on June the 13th, in which he explicitly advised that the removal of AUD overlays, in this case, would not constitute a taking, and so forth. While avoidance of the civic consequences of closure is, of course, the principal concern in arguing for AUD exemptions, I want to make several additional observations regarding the park shown on the map here. And these remarks will suggest that the effect of the proposed exemptions on the AUD program is minimal in any case. Accordingly, I will argue, AUD exemptions need not be considered for 3 of the parks shown. The situations regarding these parks are not of the same degree of urgency for the following reasons. The Santa Barbara RV Park, which is on the list, should not be included for the obvious reason that there are no long-term residents who would be affected by potential AUD development. The RV population is, by definition, short-term, transient. The residents of the Santa Barbara Green Mobile Home Park, which is listed, they own their park. So, thus, they would presumably profit from its sale under AUD incentives. Then, thirdly, the so-called Sycamore Mobile Home Park, which is listed, is not a mobile home park at all. Although its former designation as a mobile home park has apparently been somehow retained, this property has been recently developed into the controversial and unsightly apartment buildings along Lower East Side 101. This leaves, several parks that have long-term resident populations threatened with displacement by AUD-induced development. This is an undesirable situation which could be significantly lessened by the exemptions being considered. Additionally, the footnote, this asterisk here to here, as George mentioned, regarding potential AUD units, states that the estimates shown in the table, quote, assume no environmental constraints. And in that regard, I will again note that Sycamore Creek, which runs through the length of Flamingo Park, in addition to periodic flooding, presents undeniable environmental constraints, both architecturally and ecologically. Thus, the table accompanying the agenda packet overestimates both the number of properties which need be considered, as well as their AUD potentials, and in light of this reduced estimate of impact upon the AUD program, as well as the aforementioned primary concerns regarding civic consequences, we urge your recommendation of these exemptions to the City Council.
Thank you very much. Okay, Kathy McCammon.
This is just the subject of one letter that we sent to you. So we support removal of the designation, but the rest of the time is for the number 3.
Okay, thank you. All right, so the item is now back to the committee. Mr. Jordan?
So I just have a question. What does it revert to if you take away the AUD designation? Because none of these are in the high density area.
Right. Mr. Chair and Commissioner Jordan, if these properties were removed from the AUD program, they could only develop residential uses at the base density. And so in these multifamily zones, it would be 1 unit per 3,500 square feet of lot area. So there are other, as you look at the AUD map here, and you see some areas like around the Armory, the high school, the junior high, they're grayed out on the map. The AUD program does not apply to those parcels because we assume those wouldn't be redeveloped as residential uses. So, but in the unlikely event that they were, they could only redevelop at base density. And so that would be the result of removing these mobile home parks from the AUD program map.
Thanks.
Other questions? Mr. Campanella?
Is it possible for someone to secure other property and build a mobile home park in the city, and at what density would they be allowed to build one?
It would depend on the site, the zoning, and I'm not that familiar with our mobile home park regulations and how we account for density, and would work with the state on that, I believe, so I couldn't speculate.
Okay, so we have a recommendation before this committee, which I do support, and if
Mr. Chair, I move to support the recommendation.
Second.
And remove the AUD from the mobile home parcels.
I'll second that.
Motion by Lodge, second by Jordan, to recommend removing the AUD designation from the mobile home parks. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? All right, so ordered. Okay. All right, so thank you for coming out today. Now
Chair White, if I may, just for the benefit of the public, just to be clear, the council has initiated a code amendment to. Well, they've sent this to the committee. Did they initiate an amendment? No. So it would need to go back to the City Council. They will then need to initiate a zoning ordinance amendment that would be subject to the review of the Planning Commission, and then the review of the Ordinance Committee, and then back to the City Council. So it's not done yet, just to be clear.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Buell. Okay, that brings us then to the highlight of our agenda. And that is to review the Housing Task Force actions and additional topics. Mr. Staff, you want to introduce this, and then we'll take it on?
Mr. Chair White, George Buell, Community Development Director. And in your agenda packet today is an outline of the various actions that have been taken.
Please keep it quiet as you leave so we can hear here. Thank you.
In your agenda packet today is an outline of the various actions that have been taken by the task force since it was convened in February of this year. And we can walk through these one by one just to confirm. And throughout the course of deliberation, the task force and the public have identified a number of issues that may be worthy of consideration by the City Council to authorize the task force to look into a little bit more. It'll be helpful to have your feedback on that. We do intend on taking a status report of the task force to the City Council in August, and I would like to be able to, from a staff perspective certainly, be able to describe what is being, what decisions have been made by the task force, and what additional things the task force might seek council authorization to look into further. And so with that, I'll turn it over to you, Chair White, to walk through, and if there's anything that I can add through the course of your deliberation, I'd be happy to try to help you out.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Buell. And I do think it would be appropriate for us to just take a minute. First of all, the rest of this session now, and I'd like to at least shoot it going, we could go as, from my perspective, we can go till 3:30. That works for everybody. That's an hour. We'd end up with, 7, 8 minutes apiece kind of thing. If should we need that much time, 7 to basically brainstorm. So we can go over. Obviously, the more time we use going over stuff, then the less time we have to talk individually. But I do think it would be appropriate to just do a telegram version of what we've got going so far. And the not the council directives. Well, Mr. Buell, help us out. Just where would we start with? What have we got done that we could quickly
Yes, certainly. Looking at objective number 1, I'm just going to read through it. Analyze effectiveness of the program to provide housing for existing residents and employees, to explore options to assess impact fees or otherwise mandate the construction of rental housing affordable to households earning between 80 and 120 of AMI. And at this point, the task force has not taken any formal action. As you are very well aware, we're in the process of getting the facts that we need in order to inform deliberation and decisions and recommendations.
We're doing the study necessary in order to move this forward.
That's correct.
Okay.
Objective number 2 is to investigate adjustments to the parking requirements. I'm not going to, parking requirements. And the direction was to staff to explore other parking solutions and report back to the Housing Task Force. And that was complete with Rob Dayton speaking to the task force on May 27th.
I have a question on objective 1.
Dominguez.
Mr. Buell, so it says in progress, and then there's also the studies. So is the city not doing anything independent of the consultant in terms of analyzing whether this program is actually working, whether it's producing workforce affordable housing?
through the, and I don't, if Renee can step up, as far as the surveys.
Right. Councilmember Dominguez, you'll recall, we do have a requirement for most AUD projects. We trailed a little bit, but we do have a requirement for all the priority and high density that they've submit an annual survey once the units are built and occupied. Of course, we only have one project that's built and occupied, so we haven't yet received the results of that survey. But when we do start seeing those, we would have more data to be able to help provide information about analyzing the effectiveness of who's living in the units, where do they work, how many cars do they have, and that kind of information. But we don't have that yet.
So will you release it as it trickles in, or are you going to wait to a certain substantial amount, or what's the plan?
Our plan was to analyze it collectively in a report like our Adaptive Management Program report when we have enough data to report back on that.
So you're thinking 100 units? 200?
Didn't have a specific number of units in mind for when.
How will you know then when you meet the threshold?
I think it would depend more on timing and when we have our semi-annual joint meetings with Planning Commission and Council and we produce that kind of in-depth report for you.
So when is our next one? Is that October?
Right.
So there will be something on this then?
We won't, no. Not for the October meeting.
Because we'll only have one or two projects completed, is that why?
We'll only have one project completed, and we're focusing on a different element of general plan implementation for the October meeting. We're focusing on the climate action plan and greenhouse gas emissions.
Well, I'll be psyched to hear about those, but I do worry that we're not evaluating the effectiveness of this program we've invested so much in. So that the study, although it brings us plenty of useful information, does not bring us the information that everyone's dying to hear, which is whether this program's working. So I would recommend, and if I can get 3 or 4 people to support me, that staff bring us in the October meeting or wherever staff feels it's appropriate. But this year, the initial indication of what things are, how things are playing out. Because again, this program was designed to produce workforce affordable housing. So we have zero indication at this point whether it's successful, and we're 1,400, 1,500 units in the pipeline.
Mr. Chair, if I may chime in.
I want to make this point, though. What I'd like to do is, once your turn to have your time, that maybe you can drill down on that and see what ideas you want to bring forward.
Just that we had picked 250 units as a threshold to start analyzing the program. So that's what came out of the general plan. Right. Right. No, we were supposed to wait until there were 250 units so that we start the evaluation. It was a density, amassing of units.
Okay,
so
we got
that would be my suggestion. Thanks.
All right, let's move on with the items that we've done already. Okay, Mr. Buell.
As far as action item number 2, are there any comments or questions?
Mr. Buell? Sure. So you say complete, but you're going to go through the breakdown of specific motions that we made?
I'm going to walk through the whole memo
thank
here.
you. I didn't know if you were going to skip to number 3.
Yeah, I will.
Thank you.
Action item number 3, recommend to council that 2 parking spaces be required for 3 or more bedroom on AUD units. That was taken up by the task force in March of 2017. Again, this is in progress, and we intend to take a recommendation to initiate a zoning ordinance amendment that would presumably change the parking requirement to address this concern when we take the update to the City Council of the Housing Task Force activity in August.
Okay.
Yay.
Okay. Action item number 4, recommend that council protect neighborhoods and maximize parking options citywide, exclude AUD projects, and as opposed to reading through, this is action taken by the task force. And again, these items are all going to be considered as part of the pending nexus and economic feasibility studies. Action item number 5, increase parking incentive for housing within the CBD, consider parking maximum in Luffy, and manage downtown parking facilities to allow residential use. This was taken up by the task force, and the action was taken on May 27th, 2017. And again, this is related to the pending studies. Action item number 6, direct staff to return to the task force for further research on adjusting the parking requirements. I'm just going to summarize it that way.
Right.
And May 27th, again, it's in progress and pending the Nexus and Economic Studies. Mr. Campanella?
Yeah, question. On action items, let's see, 4 through 6, is part of the study going to specifically focus on that, or are we going to take the results of the study and then have it apply to specific cases like using downtown parking lots based on the information that we've received, which means some further analysis would be due based on the results of the survey? Asking the question.
Yeah, one moment. I'll need to reconfirm with Dave Rowell, who is off with Mr. I'm sorry, I forgot.
Mr. Consultant.
Kawahara, yeah. I believe it is part of the scope of work, and I will report back through email to the
That would
task
be
force.
the best for efficiency,
Yeah,
obviously.
it
We want
would
to know
be.
all these things at the same time.
Right.
So, thank you.
Action item number 7. Actually, we move into objective 3 here, to consider potential sources of information that will inform the task force, developers, and stakeholders as to the effect, if any, when evaluating certain aspects of the AUD incentive program. Action item number 7, that council authorize expenditure to conduct the studies. As we all know, that has been approved by council last evening. Action item number 8, that the task force accept the staff recommended areas of focus and questions. And again, this is part of the scope of work for the for Kaiser Marston, and that has been that is complete. Objective number 4, explore ways to encourage employer-sponsored and limited equity cooperative housing development. Action item number 9. There was no action taken. The task force received information with presentations that were provided at your meeting last month.
Great.
Mr. Campanella?
Do we see any follow-up action either by this committee or members of the committee with the Housing Authority and the other nonprofits who are interested in looking at the 80 to 120, as well as downtown organization and chamber? Was this going to be information and that's it, or are we looking some way maybe to help institute more research and cooperation with employers who might want to participate in the program?
From staff's perspective, at the meeting last month, we did not receive any additional direction from the task force with respect to this item, and so that's why I marked it as complete in the report here. But if that's something that you want to talk about, we're certainly
And you can bring that up
available.
in your
On
time.
items as we go forward,
Right.
potentially.
This is
Okay, thank you.
Our brainstorming session, which we
Okay.
want to maintain here. Okay. I don't want you to go over all of the. So you have one more there? That's right, you have one more.
Yeah, consider AUD overlay map amendment to exclude mobile home parks.
Okay.
Take action on that today.
Check. All right. Thank you, Mr. Buell. Now, and then we have the list of future things, which I'm going to not go into, but rather ask colleagues as well as public to make comments on what you want us to brainstorm on going forward. So we have 2 speaker slips here. First of all, Kathy McCammon. Kathy, are you still here? Okay. And and Jean Holmes, are you still here? Okay. Hi, Jean. So 4 minutes then.
Okay, thank you. Sorry that our comments aren't quite in the order of your agenda. But anyway, at this point, I'd like to address objective. Wait a minute. I'm sorry, just getting myself confused. Okay, objective 2 of the action number 5, that had to do with the recommendation for the parking incentive for housing within the central business districts. We'd like to see this discussion continued and reopened, so there could be some more points included. And one of the things that Allied is concerned about is not using public space for private development. We're really concerned about what happens when the lots are full in the evenings and weekends, knowing which lots are impacted that way. Then also building new parking structures as they've done in the past, and going as far as to delay allowing AUD applicants to use public parking for required project parking, and also to evaluate whether a new parking structure or new space is needed. One of the things that brought this concern to us is the idea that one of the AUD projects is going to now be using, at a discounted rate, the El Pueblo Viejo, Paseo Nuevo parking. And so there seems to be a real conflict if you want to have a vital downtown, and yet you want to have residents of the AUD projects use some of that parking space. And then other items, and this is getting into actually your brainstorming session, but could I add them now because I'm going to have to leave?
Yeah, this is that time.
Okay. We look forward to a discussion of the annual cap that would regulate the issuance of building permits for market rate AUD units. We know certain numbers have been talked about before, like 100 units or whatever, but we think that needs to be relooked at and possibly a different number. Then we would like to add to your discussion list what the projected rent range will be for AUD units. We think that applicants should be required to provide the projected rent range with their project submittal. We also look forward to the discussion of restricting the use of AUD units to STRs. And then, since some of the AUD projects are projected for the east side, we'd like to request a timetable for revision of the east side guidelines. While there are other issues, these are the ones we just voted on at our latest meeting. So anyway, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, Cameron Gray.
Good afternoon, Chair White and Housing Task Force members. My name is Cameron Gray, speaking on behalf of Community Environmental Council. We appreciate the opportunity to comment today. I'm going to get into some of the specific actions that we support and other ideas in a minute, but just as a reminder, we do support the AUD program at CEC. We are sensitive, though, to many of the issues raised by CAUSE today, so we appreciate your ongoing efforts to strike the right balance between the social and environmental objectives of the AUD program. So specific actions that we'd like to endorse include Action 1 with the Nexus study and housing impact fees. We would also encourage the inclusion of transportation and multimodal impact fees into that analysis, as Eve Sanford mentioned today. We support an exploration of parking in lieu fees and changes to parking policy that will target more development to the central business district. And also disincentivize development in many of the immigrant neighborhoods and historic districts of our community that are really more residential in nature. Other ideas that we have in terms of the process moving forward would be to really invite more of a participatory community process where we can have different stakeholders sit down, and maybe this is envisioned for the Nexus study. I'm not sure what the consultant's kind of plan is for this, but really invite people in to have a type of brainstorming session like you're having here today so we can get at maybe some more innovative ideas for improving the AUD program and addressing workforce housing issues in the community. So with that, I really, again, thank you for this opportunity to comment, and I look forward to continuing engaging with the task force so that we can create a vision for the community where housing is available to all, and we're not feeling stifled by a vacancy rate of less than 0.5%. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, Anna Marie Gott.
Sorry, there were no more speaker slips.
Sorry, I understand that you were submitting for this item as well.
So I just wanted to remind you again about the discussion you had yesterday. And one of the things that you discussed when you were looking at the R4 area and the large zone, which you just had up on the map for vacation rentals, that actually overlays with your AUD and substantially downtown. And I think that you guys need to bring up the topic of if we move forward and we allow some of these homes to be converted to permanent use as a hotel, that it will take that parcel out of the AUD, mix possibly. And as you're trying to cobble together new parcels for larger developments for AUD, I think that's going to have a substantial impact, especially when we're looking at housing, downtown, which is what I've constantly heard for the last few meetings, which is housing downtown. And that is where you have a substantial number of people that have already, they've already converted them illegally, and you're now going to start having more people, if this process continues, to convert them permanently to commercial use for a tiny little home when it could be repurposed into something that's much better for the entire community. The other thing that I wanted to mention was that I did not attend this meeting, but I understand that Mr. Colon was actually at a meeting in the last week or so where he discussed the number of people that are living in the county, which is 435,000, and that we have approximately 435,000 cars that are registered, which is basically a one-to-one. And how is that going to actually impact issues here with the AUD if you've got one car per each person in the population of Santa Barbara, and our transportation system is not working very well? Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so
could I
Eve
give my
Sanford.
comment now? Okay, thanks.
Haven't you already had some comments on this? Did I cut you off there? Is that what? Okay.
No, my comments are regarding future.
Okay, go for
future, discussion points. So Eve Sanford with the Santa Barbara Bicycle Coalition, SB Bike. I want to speak a little bit to ways that the AUD program could consider funding a more multimodal street network in Santa Barbara that supports biking, walking, and efficient use of cars. So you've already discussed parking in lieu of fees at your May meeting. I think parking in lieu of fees are an important option to consider for the AUD program, as they allow developers to right-size their parking to the building site and to the context of the building, making sure that it fits appropriately. For example, with downtown Santa Barbara, development isn't necessary to require as many parking spaces when you have empty parking garages that could work really well with those developments. And I wanted to mention that it's not parking in lieu of fees are not a new concept. Santa Monica actually has a $36.1 million projected revenue for their 30-year parking in lieu of fee program. And these fees help to support specific projects that fund the city's transportation and traffic goals. Santa Monica's land use and circulation element plan actually has a stated goal of no net new evening PM trips. And so they've actually been able to model through their studies that by charging these fees and investing them back into the transportation system, not only are they making it safer for biking and walking, but they're ensuring that there's no net new evening traffic from the new development that is going in. And I think we all know that that's a concern with the AD program. In addition, these work really well in tandem with transportation impact fees. Transportation impact fee is a one-time fee which pays for a fair share of the impact of a development on a street's transportation network. And so, again, this would ensure that when a project is developed, not only is the person
10 seconds.
incentivized with only one parking space, but that they also have biking and walking facilities that are truly inviting for them to use when they're deciding whether to drive or walk. And I'll just finish by mentioning that Santa Monica also was able to model that the impact of investing in these fee programs is going to ensure that only 5 intersections instead of 14 intersections actually experience significant congestion as a result of development. And I want to conclude by saying the reason I bring this up is because I think that it factors into the pro forma that you're approving today, in that this would also be another fee structure. So it's important to consider how transportation impact fees and parking in lieu of fees, would also work in conjunction with the very important and much needed affordable housing impact fee.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. So, Nikki.
I didn't realize that this was in fact.
Okay, microphone.
I didn't realize that this was in fact an agenda item and my name is on it. So I just want to be available if you have any questions about any of the top 10 tweaks.
Great. Well, thank you for that.
It has
The
to be
list
said.
is obviously has great impact because it's made it in full form all the way to this agenda. So thank you for that work. So let's give us a chance to pile in on it and see if we can chew on some of these ideas.
Okay, so I'll expect that there'll be fuller discussion after the studies?
Well, and maybe even just right now.
Oh, okay.
Okay, here we go.
May I go first? On this subject?
All right. You get your time. All right.
Oh, this is my time. So, Mr. Vincent, we gave you warning that we were going to try and ask you about the legality of some of Mickey Flax's points. Is this a good time to ask you to tell us? Here he comes. Mr. Chair, is that okay?
It's your time.
Thank you.
We have about 5 to 6 minutes apiece at this point for our.
So page 5, no.
Page 20, right?
It's page 4. Mickey Flax's top 10 tweaks to the AUD ordinance. Do you have that, Mr. Vincent?
Mr. Chair and Councilmember Rio, I do have that list. I'll start with the preferences 1 through 4. There are a couple challenges. Preferences, as a general rule, can be legal. However, there's information out there, and there are new cases that are coming out regarding the Federal Fair Housing Act, and HUD, at least under the Obama administration, was looking very carefully at how local preferences played out in their application. In fact, I have articles that I found in the last 2 days since I was informed that I was going to be coming today, that the city of San Francisco had preferences for, in replacement housing, that replacement housing, when the article described gentrification of historic neighborhoods within the city of San Francisco. Those new projects were required to have a local preference for new residents. HUD actually contacted the city of San Francisco and said, we're looking skeptically at your local housing preference, because the way it plays out, it is maintaining and perpetuating a segregated neighborhood. The HUD was looking at the makeups of the individual neighborhoods that were receiving the local preference and saying, you have a disparate percentage of whites, Asians, other suspect classifications, and the local preference was actually continuing that segregated neighborhood. It's a challenge. It doesn't mean that local preferences are illegal, but it is an issue to be looking at when we consider how a local preference would play out. The demographics of Santa Barbara may or may not be different and may not play into this issue for HUD, but it is a question that needs to be considered.
So the first one is tenants who live and work on the South Coast. What you just said, that applies to that idea?
It can. I'll give an example that came out of New York. There was a city in upstate New York, not very far. It was Westchester County, so not all the way upstate New York, but outside of New York City. In suburban, yes. They created a local preference for new projects within their community. Their community had 1.5% African Americans. The neighborhood, the communities within the same county, outside of that particular town, had much higher percentages of African Americans. Because of the local preference, HUD, again, looked to that community and said, you have a problem here. You create a local preference to the exclusion of persons who are nearby, but not within the scope of your local preference. We are going to look skeptically at that local preference and how it plays out in the distribution or segregation of housing. Again, I'm not saying that local preferences are illegal. The point I would make is that this task force and the City Council, before considering a local preference, should be doing some demographic analysis of how that preference would play out. And looking to the others, some of these other preferences that Mickey suggests may have less impact in that fashion because they wouldn't be so tied to the current geographical demographics. There's a potential. You'd have to look at each one of these, and again, the fact that you have a preference, number 4, the preference for tenants of 80 to 120. I don't know what the demographic makeup of tenants from 80 to 120, how that compares to other demographics of other categories. Again, it's just it's an issue that needs to be carefully analyzed before going down any particular preference.
How about the one about?
I'm going to say you've got 2 minutes to discuss your preferences at this point. I suggest that you do.
Can I stop and come back?
Well, and at what time is left, you certainly may. But at this point, I'm trying to give everybody their 6-7 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Vincent. I thought it was important to have him here. I asked him to come, so thanks.
Okay. All right. Ms. Lodge?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a question for Mr. Vincent.
Were there any of these that Mr. Vincent we can't do?
I would ask that we say we want to get feedback on these as to which have a shot and which don't at some point in the future. And I'm not asking you to do that now because we don't have that time now.
Sure. Mr. Chair and members of the committee, the task force, I'm not in a position to say yes or no to any particular preference right now. Quite honestly, I've just begun my looking at preferences. I bring the cautionary, because I don't want to give false hope, but at the same time, I'm not. I would not suggest that this task force take my comments as a wet blanket either. It's just a point of caution.
Well, and I would ask that again. You're raising an area of concern. I think that's what we have time to do is to consider it an area of concern, and let's get our basic ideas out there about what we think should be happening in order for this program to make a real contribution. Ms. Lodge?
Could I just respond to that? No.
Not yet. Let's give us a chance. We have not had a chance to have a conversation up here in 5 months. So this is...
Mr. Vincent, you referred to opinions from HUD. Does HUD... since HUD, there isn't any HUD money involved and so on, do they still have the same strength and weight, say, as a court decision would have?
Mr. Chair and Sheila, Ms. Lodge, the HUD is the administrative body in the federal government that enforces the Fair Housing Act. So they would bring, they can bring lawsuits under the Fair Housing Act to enforce its provisions.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, do you want to proceed with your comments?
Well, I guess we have to wait to see. So much of this depends on the report from the study that's being done. I would like to see more that gets us to getting affordability into this program, and I'm not sure how we do that. And there have been suggestions in that, having a point system, and if a project is getting some kind of assurance of being within 80 to 120% affordability rental, that certainly would be a good thing. But I don't see that we're actually heading there, and that's what concerns me. And that's the main thing.
That's the core.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's what started this whole thing for me.
Well, that's that and neighborhood compatibility, right?
Well, yeah. Yeah, well, and when you mentioned that, I suggested a while back to council that the inner west side, the R3, R4 zones be removed from the high priority overlay zone. And I still think that's an inappropriate area. We haven't been seeing many proposals since some initial ones, like a couple, but it's an area that is underparked. It ends up in the removal sometimes of less expensive units with new, more expensive units. And I still would like to look at that again.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. Thank you. Mr. Campanella?
Okay, I'm going to, if I can, in my 6 minutes, tie 3 items together, 3 of which that are apparently going to City Council in August. One is action item 11 about 100-unit cap. Mickey Flax's number 9, considering a pause once 250 is reached, going to City Council in August. And the third one is a point system presented to City Council in August. So I see these on our list, but I see them not being on our list because we're not going to talk about them or have a chance to review them before they go to City Council. So I guess I'd like to be clear, and I guess starting with action number 11, where a motion was approved for information, how this would be regulated, how sensitive it would be to units already in the pipeline. But yet, we made that motion, but apparently it's not going to be discussed by us at all or input taken prior to it going to City Council.
Chair White, Member Campanella, if I may, with respect to item 11, this is an item that the City Council did not ask the task force to look into this. However, I understand the task force is very interested in this. And to kind of give you a peek into the future, Renee Brooke will be taking an item to Council. I think it's August 11th. I might be wrong on the date, but it's coming up in August, where we're going to be seeking an initiation of a code amendment or discussion of some sort. I haven't seen the council agenda report. It hasn't been prepared yet. But taking this issue to council for direction, the recommendation is, if it's the pleasure of the council, to bring it to send it back to this task force for deliberation and recommendation. And so we're not taking a refined program at all. We're taking the concept to them, asking for direction on that.
And the concept is just, the staff report will be saying how it works or what the impacts are?
No.
Nothing?
No, not at all.
Okay.
Yeah, because we recognize that a lot of work is needed, and we also recognize that this is an item of intense interest among the task force, and so we'll be reflecting that information back to the City Council and seeking direction from them on that.
And then is this also, like any other item go before City Council, there could be legalities that have to be looked at as well, correct?
Correct.
Yeah. Okay. So it's whether they want to pursue it further or not, and on what time frame, and it would be coming back to us for review.
Yes.
Okay.
Right.
Thank you. That clears that up. And then what about considering a pause? Item 9, Mickey's recommendation. Consider a pause on processing applications when the probability of 250 is built. And I believe the application issue, not accepting anymore, was before City Council. That had some issues with it. This one here is when the units are built, not accepting any more applications. Is that going to be?
That would be part of the deliberation of the same general topic.
Okay, but that would that possibly be coming back to us as well?
Yes. Yeah, that very well could be wrapped into the conversation among the task force. As staff, we would feel much more comfortable knowing that the City Council has given the okay for this to be considered by the task force, because it will require a number of meetings to work through this. It's not this is important to the essence of the program, and also how we set up a point system to evaluate projects, essentially getting developers to compete with each other so that the community wins as well.
Okay, so and hopefully further discussion on these points, if it does come back to us, again, will be in light of getting information from the study as well, correct? That the impact study itself could give us good information in looking at this information. Okay, so it's one and the same. Okay, well, thank you for the clarification. My concern was it was moving on and we wouldn't see it again, but
no, that's
I understand what you're saying.
That's not staff's intent at all.
Thank you.
Okay, any other suggestions, ideas?
Yeah, I'm sorry if I have a minute left. It would be, since we had a lot of interest on looking at employer programs or the 80 to 120, which is our target, which could create a good amount of volume versus perhaps maybe just inclusionary in a certain number of projects, however many get through the system. I would like to think that there would be some additional discussions that might be precipitated by this committee with those groups that are interested in employer housing, including the Housing Authority. So I'd like to at least put that on our list and maybe conceive how we can effectively go about that.
Okay.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you. So let's just start down this way. Mr. Olson, you want to give us your wisdom?
Got to get the right button here.
Hit the right button.
Right. I'm thinking of or recommending that we combine the ordinance amendments that are in process, the parking ordinance and the mobile home ordinance, with an amendment to restrict the units, AUD units, from being converted to short-term rentals and hotels. Actually have it in the ordinance. That would give then staff the ability to have conditions of approval on each project that would actually document that they would not be allowed to be converted. And also, this is a minor one, to include in the ordinance limited equity housing condominiums in the same way that you have now in the ordinance limited equity housing cooperatives. The reality is that if we ever do see a ownership, limited equity ownership project, it's going to be a condominium given the financing situation. So I would recommend that the ordinance be amended to include that. And it involves amending several parts of the ordinance. My other thoughts are more connected to what council comes back with from the August meeting. So I'll wait for that. But I really feel that we've talked about the short-term rental situation, and I think we should go forward with a recommendation to council to actually amend the ordinance to restrict that conversion.
Okay. Mr. Vincent?
Mr. Chair, I'd like to make some other additional comments after Task Force Member Olson's comments regarding the conversion of any AUD unit that from a residential rental unit to some other use. There's a state law known as the Ellis Act. It was enacted in 1985 in response to a Supreme Court decision concerning the proposed removal of residential rental units, residential rental apartments from that happen to be rent controlled in the city of Santa Monica. The city of Santa Monica had an ordinance that controlled the removal of rental units from the rental housing stock. And ultimately, the way it played out is it affected a prohibition on the removal of these units. The case went up to the California Supreme Court, which told the property owner, you, as long as you can have an economically viable use of your property, you do not have a constitutional right, or it is not a taking for the city of Santa Monica to require you to remain in the residential rental business. The legislature reacted quickly and adopted the Ellis Act, which essentially says to local public entities, no public entity shall by statute, ordinance, or regulation, or by administrative action implementing any statute, ordinance, or regulation, compel the owner of any residential real property to offer or to continue to offer accommodations in the property for rent or lease. Essentially, the state legislature said, if you want to, as a property owner, you can get out of the rental residential business. There are some limitations to the scope of the law, and they are important. They do reserve the community's right to regulate land uses once a property is out of the residential rental business. So it's not to say that you can't restrict what uses those apartments turn into, but the city is restricted from prohibiting a property owner from saying, we don't want to be in the rental business anymore. In the context that you're describing, yes, the city could adopt an ordinance that says, yes, you don't have to stay in the residential rental business, renting for long term. However, you could say, if you're going from an AUD unit, you can go out of the business, but you can't go into short-term rental. That's part of your land use regulatory processes, and with an appropriately adopted ordinance, we could do that. So that's and it's there, but I wanted the task force and ultimately the city council and everybody in the room to understand there are some limitations and our expectations regarding the rental units that are developed under the AUD, and what the city's limitations on how can we require, or if we can require, a property owner to remain. The last point I want to make is that we do have a provision in the priority housing overlay where we've offered an additional amount of density in exchange for a commitment from the property owner they would maintain those units as rental units for as long as they maintain that property at that residential density. That's a covenant that we have recorded on each of the properties that have been developed under the priority housing overlay. I believe that covenant is different than some of the other provisions that have been in other jurisdictions that have been invalidated. Provisions where if you convert your unit, you have to have a one-for-one replacement. The City of San Francisco tried that, and that was invalidated. The City of Los Angeles tried that, and it was invalidated. Our provision, yes, they would have to reduce the density. They'd have to reduce the size, the number of units if they were to convert out of residential rental. Okay. But I think we could see where the housing would be protected.
So, could that agreement be amended to specify that short-term rentals could not be, or the unit could not be converted to short-term rentals?
Yeah, I would.
You know what I would ask is that your policy position that you're advocating is that the short-term rentals not be part of the AUD package, right, and to the maximum extent feasible. So we could pass that policy directive or preference, if I can use that term, to council, and just let our attorneys come up with what our best tools are for making that happen.
Yes.
Is that okay?
Yeah.
All right, great. So do you have other items that you want to run by us? Great. Well, thank you for that. All right, Mr. Dominguez?
If I may, Chair White, just for a moment, just for clarity for staff, when we want to make sure that there's consensus among the task force with the various suggestions that are being made. And so at the end, I want to make sure that, or I would ask that there be clear direction given by the entire task force as opposed to ideas being suggested. And everybody's looking at me as though, and I'm nodding my head, but I don't want that to be mistaken for, yeah, we're going to start working on that right away when I'm not sure if the entire task force is okay with that.
So you want Mr. Olson to make a motion, and we can do it right now? You want to do it right now?
Yes, please.
I would move that we direct staff to wait a minute, what do we want to do? We want
The city to eliminate the use of short-term residential
Rentals.
units, short-term rentals, in the AUD districts.
Mr. Chair, again, I would make the suggestion that we're a little more specific when talking about AUD. I would presume you're talking about the priority overlay with all the incentives built in, or are you talking about the equivalent of the lowest density of variable?
All AUDs.
All AUDs, everything in the city.
They can't do it in high priority right now. They can, right?
Correct.
It's forbidden in high priority, but they
Correct.
can do it in
So you're
high
talking
and
about-
medium
You're
high.
talking about doing it in any other
Every AUD unit cannot be.
And this is Mr. Olson's motion at this
Okay.
point. So he can move what he wishes. So
I would move that we ask staff to, I would move that we
recommend to council.
recommend to council that they direct staff to come back with an ordinance amending the AUD program to restrict conversion of units to short-term rental units or hotel uses.
As a motion and second to restrict the use of AUD units for short-term rental purposes.
It's clear.
Any other discussion on that?
Yes.
Mike?
So that would be regardless of zone, is what we're saying? That would encompass any zone.
All AUD.
All AUD.
units.
And does an applicant continue to have the opportunity to opt out of AUD and go back to variable density at this time? Is that true or false?
Mr. Chair, the way I would see that would work in areas outside of the priority housing overlay, it would primarily those would be residential zones. In order to not run afoul of the Ellis Act, a medium-high project would have to have the ability to convert to condominiums. But you could restrict it from converting from residential rental units to short-term rentals.
Okay.
Okay, so there's a motion and a second. Any other discussion at this point? Mr. Campanella?
Mr. Vincent, converting to medium-high condominiums, they would have to comply with variable density? No, they can do it under AUD, which would allow them the same benefits of AUD, correct?
They could convert to the condominiums under AUD.
Okay.
The medium-high density under AUD right now today can be developed as either residential rental or as condominium units.
Okay, thank you.
All right, so we have a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed?
No.
Okay, so the motion passes 6-1. Okay, anything else, Mr. Olson? No. All right. Mr. Dominguez.
Mr. Jordan go first.
Okay, let's do that if
The
you
date
like.
with the train. First, again, I hear just the word AUD being said frequently, where I'm taking my perception is that people are complaining about the high priority overlay section when they're talking about tweaks, when they're talking about consequences, when they're talking about fixes here and there. And I would suggest that we're really careful about saying what we exactly mean. And then just going through the staff report, I too am annoyed at the direction that the discussion on this cap of any number took. I missed that meeting and saw the notes and saw it was coming back, and I think it still probably complies with what's written on paper because it will come back. But I think the perception of certainly the people in the room that day and the perception I had secondhand was that it was going to come back with more information before it went to council. I know that in subsequent discussions I've had that I think the determination's been made to try and get a litmus test from council before we waste more time below council. So I get that, but I think the discussion of a cap or no cap was primed and set for this particular body, and is probably one of the most important non-discussed items that is in front of us, and will continue not to be discussed until sometime in August or later, and that's if somebody asks council to allow the Housing Task Force to continue meeting, because this is the extent of our meetings today. So I would like to see a future discussion of that. That kind of dovetails into my number one request at the end of this agenda, and that would be that this task force does recommend to council that we continue to meet monthly to talk about everything on this list. I really don't see anything on this list or anything that's been talked about today that doesn't warrant more discussion. I would, as I have in the past, I would like to see those discussions less in a structured setting and more in a work session setting, sitting around a square table with everybody looking at themselves. If there are multiple meetings, I would like to explore the possibility of recessing from one meeting to the next meeting so that we could have public comment at the start, have subsequent meetings where we're work sessioning, and then have public comment at the end, rather than session timelines being taken up by public comment that's the same public comment meeting after meeting, and we go from 2 minutes of discussion to a freewheeling 5 to 7 minutes of discussion per person. I still don't think that's been very productive. I'd like to see staff cross out Mickey Flax's top 10 tweaks that aren't legal and leave the ones that potentially are legal, and so we can talk about those. And I like the suggestion of adding to the list the State Street Donut Hole. I would also like to see a discussion on mitigation for high priority overlay that results in the loss of existing residential units or small businesses. And I think that's it. And so I will apologize in a few minutes. I'm just going to get up and walk out, but I have to catch a train. So
okay. Do you have so what we are doing, what staff is asking us to do is to make motions on...
Well, I guess my overarching motion would be to make a motion that we recommend to council that they authorize the Housing Task Force to continue meeting on a monthly basis on items to be determined off of this agenda packet, and then report back recommendations to council as we accomplish that. So I'd make that motion.
Okay, there's a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
There's a motion and a second to continue the task force with the list of the materials that we have so far. Any other discussion?
Does Mr. Buell have a comment, or do you have staff time for this, sir?
The one concern I would have comes up in the month of August, where we know that we're doing an awful lot of work with Kaiser Marston, and putting together an agenda packet that is thoughtfully prepared would be a challenge for us. So I would ask that we take a break in August, but to reconvene in September and continue monthly.
I would even suggest that first meeting be less of an agenda and more of a work session to set future agendas. So it doesn't have to happen in August. That's fine. It could happen in September, but still again, we're looking at an hour and a half today. I've got to leave. People still have to talk, and that first meeting could be a discussion on what we see as future agendas for you then to look at work and what resources you can or can't bring.
Mm-hmm. And I think also there is the opportunity to make written contributions to sort of make comments to staff about what good ideas that you might have, so that we sort of compile them that way. That's, Mr. Vincent, that is a legal tool we can use as individual board members, just to ask staff or make suggestions to staff for things that go on the agenda. Is that a...
Yes, you may submit. You each may. I mean, you can always submit comments to staff.
Great. All right. Thank you. All right, so we have a motion to continue the task force.
I'll be voting for this. I like the ideas brought forth by some of the people that have lasted this long, and there'll be more time to hear your ideas. And it sounds like you're doing some work in the community, so thank you.
Okay. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, so we're going to ask council to continue this task force. Anything else, Mr. Jordan?
I'm good.
Okay, thank you.
I just wanted to start by clearing one thing up. The AUD incentive program will be in effect for a trial period of either 8 years or until 250 residential units have been constructed in the areas designated for high-density residential or priority, as shown on the AUD map, whichever occurs earlier. So this program ends when 250 units are constructed, correct?
That is correct.
Okay, so any studying we want to do before the program ends if we're looking at continuing it. If we're not going to continue it, I'm not sure how much use there is in studying it, but I just want to say I'm all for studies, I'm for data, I'm for science, I'm for facts, unlike the direction the White House seems to be taking our country, but not to get too political. I don't see why we would want to not look at what the impacts of STRs, it may be good, it may be bad, it may be consistent with your agenda, and it may be conflicting with your agenda, but the more information and data we have, the better off we are. So earlier is always better in my book, to the extent we can pay for it and afford it, and we're not overburdening staff. And I charge you all with letting us know when we are overburdening you so we can play with the budget a little bit if we needed to give you more help or slow down our demands. But I think you've been doing a great job, and this task force has been amazingly successful in my eyes, and that give you guys all a round of applause for the reforms we've been able to push through so far, and a lot more coming up here in August and September and heading back to council. The 100-unit metering, or the cap, that was actually voted on by council. It was a 4-3 vote sent to staff, so that's not actually a task force function. So it may or may not come back here. I'm certainly open to bringing it back, but it's going to come to council next, and they can decide whether to kick it back here or just go straight to planning. So either way, Mr. Kampmann, you're going to have a crack at this. So
2 is better.
You're a masochist. So going on to the things that I want to see, I agree with all of Ms. Flax's, her 10 plus 2 tweaks. We voted on the STRs, but you obviously know that I would love for us to tweak the AUD so that it doesn't turn into short-term rentals. I think overall we need to look at our structure, how we're making decisions. This is a great forum here, but I'd love to open it up. I think Mr. Gray and possibly Mr. Cornell mentioned having more community involvement. It's kind of like with me, data and facts, the more community involvement, the better. I've been a community organizer for several years of my life, so I'd love to see more community involvement, more stakeholders. I think we need to do a MOPUS plan. We need to do a State Street downtown plan, specific plan. We need to update these. These are going to be incredible projects. They're going to be very meaningful. They're going to take a lot of time and energy. But the Housing Task Force, we're kind of putting Band-Aids on things. We're playing whack-a-mole. But we really need to take a 30,000-foot view of the city of Santa Barbara and what we want to do now with kind of the new economy. 6 years into the AUD and in the general plan, we need to reevaluate. Even the communists only do 5-year plans. So we're past what even Marx and Lenin, Stalin would have allowed. So I think it's time to stop and be thoughtful and get as much community involved and as many stakeholders involved as possible. So the other, I just want to go back to the first one. I'm not sure what you could do for Objective 1 that would address my concerns. So I'm leaving it up to you to be creative and come up with something of value. But if the AUD does end, and I think everyone here wants to see whatever replaces it be more successful to more people than what we've had so far. So do you see a type of survey that could be conducted? Because I'm guessing the AUD looks like it's set to expire in about a year. What are we at, 100 units now certified, or?
In terms of certificates of occupancy being issued, I believe we're under 50 at this point. The MARC is operating under a temporary certificate of occupancy.
It doesn't have?
Not yet.
It's not being counted in those numbers?
Correct.
Okay. Once it's in, that'll kick it up pretty close to 100?
130.
Yeah.
130?
140.
Okay. So is a year from now a possibility, or what's your best estimate on what AUD would be
I believe
expired?
last spring when Renee presented the AUD program to the City Council and Planning Commission in joint session, her estimate at that point, I believe, was a year and a quarter, year and a half.
18 months?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So assuming we're still kind of on that path, a year, give or take a few months, if we're going to replace that program, we need to be thinking about what Plan B is. What's the successor to this program? So maybe that's something that this task force should take up is, do we want to do separate community plans? Do we want to look at a new general plan? Or do we want to be just very specifically focused on affordable housing?
Okay, so do you have, all right. Well, thank you. The idea is that, first of all, I really appreciate hearing the comments of each of you, and hopefully we're getting a little closer to adjusting the AUD. This task is to take the AUD, look over the horizon past the 250 at a program that's going to be sustainable longer term than the 250 units. That's where we're trying to get. And are there controversies to suck out of this program that we can get rid of by looking more closely? And what opportunities are there for new development? So in that last vein, what we're hearing from all branches, all portions of the community, is a need to revisit the downtown, the central business district, the donut hole, the whole sort of central area, which is struggling now so much from the retail perspective. So we have an area that's, here's this booming economy, booming land values, and yet we have a real crisis happening right in the center of town. So I'm picturing there being that one of the sessions that this committee takes on when we're reauthorized is the central business district. What can we do to rejuvenate, regenerate the housing opportunities that exist, the parking incentives that could be put there, fees? I mean, there are those range of incentives that could be brought to bear downtown to be rejuvenating downtown with a higher residential component to it. So I see that as a focused session for one of our Wednesdays. A second one is the geography of AUD on the citywide. Are there places where this is sort of running into a brick wall, or where we're running into more conflict than it's worth? So the geography of AUD in total for the city is one, again, for me. I think that there are areas on the outer edges of AUD where we're paying a high price in terms of controversy and ill will, shall we say, for the benefits that we're getting out of that. So that would be another one that, again, would make sense to me. I really like the idea of the point system. I think rather than getting this development all going to upper income folks or middle and upper income folks, how can we get the program to be more focused at the target incomes? And the point system seems to be one candidate for making that happen. So that's another one where I think, and Mr. Buell has had experience working with this idea in other jurisdictions. So I'm really interested to hear how that actually works in other places and how it might work here. So that point system, again, for me, is a session to have to deal with. Mitigation fees, as I've been advocating those for a long time. I think they're a good idea, and we obviously have the Nexus study going today on affordability. He was very clear in his description. Not transportation. If you go elsewhere, you go to Goleta, you go to Carpinteria, you go to the county, there are traffic mitigation fees, there are park fees, there are other fees, and I'm open to that package. And obviously, the more high income the units are, then the greater the financial offset should be. So those are three areas that I think we should look at after this hopefully is reauthorized. So I would make a motion that those three items, the focus on the CBD, a review of the geography of the AUD, that the mitigation fees and the point system each be provided at a day in the future task force for discussion.
Second.
So we have a motion and a second for those recommendations. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Okay, well, I appreciate your support on that, and hopefully that will bring some constructive discussion forward. Okay, we're a little bit over. Anybody have? Oh, Kathy, you were really kind of cut off there. Would you like to have some more comments now?
No, I'm good. Thank you.
All right, great. Okay. Campanella?
Thanks, staff. I think the amount of work that was done by staff in putting the material together, I think covered all corners and really teed it up for our discussions and really informed the public as well. So there's a lot more items we want to talk about, but really appreciate the way you get us supported. And I know it's a lot of time and effort in a short amount of time turnaround. So thank you all, and extend that to David and the rest of the staff.
Yeah,
exactly. It's
well put. And so we actually dragged a range of staffers in who this is not necessarily their frontline work, and of course we have the boss himself here an awful lot. So we really do appreciate your focused attention with us. So and again, folks, thank you for coming and not only coming but hanging in there with us. So with that, this meeting is adjourned. Staff, do you need anything else from us at this point?
Just as a point of clarification, because we heard motions from four of the members, is it safe to assume that the items that were suggested by the others that weren't taken by formal motion okay with the balance of the task force?
I'll take that leap and say yes.
Mr. Chair, your motion covered the things that I was concerned about, so
okay,
yes.
Great. Thank you.
The only other, I don't know if it's on the list or not, as far as continuing to look at the affordable housing and workforce housing. I don't know if we need an emotion on that. Is that still on the list rather than closed? I guess that would be my motion.
Okay. And I'm sorry, I'm not clear on what you're asking.
Well,
if I may suggest, make a motion.
What's
a motion that the task force also maintain on its list further follow-up on the ability to provide 80 to 120% housing and workforce housing with the assistance of the Housing Authority, other nonprofits, as well as the business community.
Second.
Make that an item for us to continue to look at rather than case closed.
Okay.
I second.
All right, there's a motion and a second. And I'll leave that for staff to pick those words apart. Okay. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? All right. Good. All right. Well, with that then, anything else?
So you were donut hole, geography of AUD, mitigation fees, and what was the fourth one?
Okay. Then this meeting is adjourned. Let me just look here and see what you're... Point system geography